My name is Eric Martel. I'm an entrepreneur and real estate investor, and I have done over $85 million in real estate transactions. Welcome back to my channel, and on this channel, I explore ways for you to make more money. Today, we're going to talk about Subject to, which is a form of seller financing in real estate transaction that has gained some popularity recently, mainly due to Pace Morby. We will be covering what Subject to is, the pros and cons, and how to do these transactions successfully. All right, let's just get into it. So what is it? It's a form of seller financing, really. When you do seller financing, that means that the seller is lending the buyer some or all the money in order to acquire their property. With Subject to, what happens is that as the buyer, I am leveraging or using the seller's existing mortgage to buy the property so that I don't have to get financing myself. So that's the big difference. So as you can imagine, it's not a straightforward transaction. So this is actually a very sophisticated investment strategy, and it also involves a number of risks that we're going to talk about in the pros and cons. So let's talk about the pros and cons. Well, there's some good pros about it. It's great to do Subject to transactions because you don't have to find new financing. The financing is already there, has already been assigned to the property. All you have to do is transfer the property to your name and then somehow make the mortgage payment. So that means faster transaction process. I don't have to go and apply for a loan, wait for the underwriting and all that kind of stuff. I don't have to come up with all the documentation that's required. So much faster from that perspective. The financing is already in place. Typically, the loan terms are better, especially in today's age where the interest rates are around 7.5%. You could get a loan at maybe 4 or 3.5% when the seller actually got their mortgage like a few years ago. So that's great. You would have much lower interest rate. Also, less capital required potentially. So this really depends on kind of the appreciation of the property, how much equity is on that property. So it may or may not have actually less capital requirements, but it is a possibility definitely that you could have less capital. You need less capital to buy the property. Some of the cons, so we hear that all the time, is the due on sale clause. Every mortgage contract out there has this due on sale clause that whenever the ownership is transferred from the seller to a buyer, then the mortgage is due automatically. So you want to kind of like go around that. There's also some potential harm to the seller's credit. So on one hand, if you miss a mortgage payment, then it goes on the credit of the seller because the seller's name is still on the mortgage. And that also means that the mortgage is also going to show up on the credit report for the seller. So that might also affect their credit that way. You have limited control. You can't limited control over the financing terms. The financing terms have been set. The contract has been signed a few years ago. You're not going to be able to change that. So whatever is in there is in there. You also have some legal and ethical considerations because you have to protect the seller's interest as well as your own. So you want to make sure that whatever you're doing, that it is ethically. That you feel good about it, that you feel ethical about doing this transaction. You are helping many of these sellers get out of their house because they're in financial distress. So you might be doing a good thing, so that's good for it to do that, but you want to make sure that you really are explaining the terms of the deal to the sellers very well to make sure that the transaction goes very smoothly and that the seller's interests are also protected. There's also some insurance and tax implications. So if there could be some capital gains tax on the seller side, so you want to make sure that they are aware of that potentially. They would talk to their CPA. There's also some insurance implications, so you want to make sure that you are protected with the same way that you would be if you own the property directly. So let's talk about how you do an actual Subject to transactions. What are the steps? The first step is really finding motivated sellers. So this is always, if you want to find a deal, you have to find sellers that are motivated. They want to work with you to get that deal going. So people in financial distress, people that are going through divorce, people that have going through foreclosure, these are the people that you want to talk to, and you're helping them out of a foreclosure situation, for example, or any kind of financial distress they may have. So you're doing something good for them, you're helping them out, and this is also a good way for you to find a good deal. You could also look at expired MLS listings, so people that have tried to sell their houses and after like 3, 4, 5 months they were unable to sell the house. So this is another possibility where you can go after these expired MLS listing and ask them if they want to go direct, and then make an offer. For sale by owners, another, and also Craigslist, sites like that where people are trying to sell the properties on their own to avoid basically realtors' commission. If they're trying to avoid realtors' commissions, they could indicate that they are in financial distress and they can't afford that, or so. This is another place where you can look for some deals also. But everywhere you would look for deals, this is where you would what you would do to find these motivated sellers. Now, negotiation and agreement. You're going to have to explain the terms of this transactions, how the transaction is going to work. You want to explain the pros and cons to the seller. You want to make sure that you're on the same page, that they understand exactly what's going on and how you're planning to acquire their properties. So this is very important. Most people have never heard of subject to. So imagine you're a seller, you're sitting at home, and then you get a phone call from some guy that wants to buy your house, and they say, "Hey, I don't have any money, and I want to leverage your mortgage to buy your property." Well, you're going to have to do some explaining because most people don't know anything about subject to. Then you want to draft a purchase agreement, and in this purchase agreement, you want to make sure that you specify that the mortgage is going to stay in the seller's name. So that's number one. And you want to outline the responsibility of each party. As the buyer, I'm going to be responsible for paying the mortgage, the property taxes, the expenses. You also want to talk about the responsibility on the seller's side to make sure that that they maintain the mortgage and that they stay on the mortgage. You want to make sure that the seller is also, if there's any back taxes and stuff like that. So you want to talk about all these things. Then you want to do your due diligence. You want to do the same due diligence you would do on a property, but you also want to do maybe a little bit more in terms of the financial due diligence. You want to make sure that the property taxes have been paid, that there's no mechanical liens or any kind of other liens on the property. So this is very important. You also want to prepare these legal and financial documents that are needed, so the contracts for doing that. And that's going to be important. We're going to talk about the deal execution. There's going to be a number of different things that are going to have to happen in order to make this deal work. So let's talk about the deal execution. How do we execute the deal? So again, this is a sophisticated investment strategy. It's not the straight purchase and sales agreement and then you get the financing and you close on the deal. You have to do something a little bit different that's not going to trigger the due on sale clause, and still you control the property. So the number one thing that most people do is to create a trust, create a land trust. Now, why a land trust? Well, it's easy to transfer properties into it and out of it. You also have the privacy of ownership, so you don't have to disclose who owns, who the beneficiaries of the land trust are. So that's going to preserve the privacy of that entity. You still have the same liability protection that you would have with an LLC, and because of the privacy of ownership, and because it's a trust, it may not trigger the due on sales clause. So most lenders are very lenient about transfer of properties from your personal name to a trust that you are the beneficiary of. So normally that's not going to trigger a due on sale clause. So you would be pretty safe there. There's actually a case, like a court case that basically clarifies that and makes sure that the lenders were lenient on the trust transfer. So you've created the trust. And then at that point, the seller is going to be the beneficiary of the trust, so initially. So that's what's going to happen. Then the next thing is that now you have the property and you have the trust. You want to transfer the property's ownership from the seller into the trust. So that's called, you do a deed of transfer, and you want to make sure that you record the deed with the local government. You want to make sure that this is official, that this is recorded with the government, so that we clearly know that the trust owns that particular property. How do you do that really depends on the jurisdiction, but your attorney, again, would be able to help you with that. Now, on sale, when you do the actual sale of the transaction, what happens is that you actually change the ownership or the beneficiary of the trust from the seller to you, the buyer. So again, the property is owned by the trust, and the trust is now controlled by you. So you control the property through the trust. You don't want this transaction, this change of beneficiary on the trust, to be recorded publicly or you want to keep that private. Again, to avoid the lender knowing about this transfer and actually initiate the due on sale clause. So you want to make sure that you keep that private. In terms of the insurance protection, you want to make sure that you're protected, obviously, from liability and all of that. So one thing is that you want to make sure that the insurance names the trust as the insured, but you also want to add yourself, you as an individual, as an additional insured on the policy. So then that way you're going to be protected, and the property is also going to be protected. And now you have control of the property. You want to make sure that so the mortgage is still in the seller's name. You want to make sure that you make these mortgage payments, otherwise it's going to trigger a whole bunch of issues for you, the sellers, and everybody else. And to make sure that nobody knows that there was a change in ownership, you want to use the trust name for everything, or the trust bank account for everything that you do. When you pay the mortgage payment, don't pay the mortgage using your own personal bank account or some other random LLC bank accounts that you have. You want to use the trust bank account so that the mortgage company would look at it and say, oh yeah, it's owned by the trust, the money is coming from the trust, there's no issues. Same thing with insurance. You want to make sure that all of that is paid. The trust name is the person, is the entity that's owning the property. Everything needs to go through that. And this is how you actually execute a subject to deal. So this is how you do a subject to transaction. So very different, right? So it's not the typical transaction. It's a sophisticated investment strategy. This is why you need to be 100% clear on how the transaction goes through every step of the way and be able to answer questions. You're going to have to talk to a seller who doesn't know anything about subject to. You're going to have to explain to them what a subject to is, how it works, and how they should be okay with that kind of transaction. So that's going to be important to know. You also want to be working with attorneys. So you want to talk to attorneys that are very familiar with these subject to transactions. You also want to understand the risk and have a contingency plan. So the main risk is really that due on sale clause. You want to make sure that you are prepared in case the lender is actually calling the loan. You want to make sure that you're prepared. So what are you going to do if they call the loan due? You want to find financing. You want to make sure that you have quick access to another financing source, private investors or whatnot, or you have cash in the bank. And this is how you would go about this, preparing a contingency plan for these kinds of risks. So thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful and informational. As you know, I'm not making money doing these videos. I am here to help you make more money. And this is something that you want for your life too. Make sure you like, subscribe, and follow me on social media. See you next time.